All right. Welcome to Bigger Truth Media. We are here this morning with John Gibbs, and I am so excited for this. John reached out to me a few weeks ago, and he said, Scott, I don't know word for word, but he basically said, Scott, everything that you say in your reports is true because I've lived it. And so we started talking about his experience there in Ottawa County. And Joe Moss is the chairman of the County Board of Commissioners in Ottawa County, and he also runs an organization called Ottawa Impact. And Joe Moss was the reason why I knew this was an issue right away is because in my second report, I've done 4 different reports on the operation to infiltrate the grassroots. And in the second report, I talk about MIPF, Michigan Precinct First. And in that organization was created by Anna Camp, and also Joe Moss was involved in the formation of that, according to a few of my sources that I cite in that report. I didn't actually bring Joe Moss into it at that point because I didn't have a lot of background information when I wrote this story. This is about a month ago, but I was very much familiar with him, and I also knew that one of the first things that Christina Cromwell did once she became chair of Michigan Republican Party is she paid Joe Moss $90,000 to build the MIGOP website and provide 8 basic business laptops for $90,000. So there's obviously an issue there. I'm not going to say he's corrupt, but I don't know. There's an issue there, so we'll leave it at that. And so, John, you worked under Ben Carson in the Trump administration, and you were there for 4 years. I posted on Twitter and Facebook just the awesome picture that you have on your banner picture of you. Is that in the Oval Office?
Yes, it is. Yep.
I was in the Oval Office with President Trump and Ben Carson and the whole host of all the other advisors and cabinet members, and you're sitting right next to Ben Carson, right at Trump's desk. That was a pretty awesome picture. And then you ran for U.S. rep for U.S. Congress, and in a mostly blue district. It was a close district, right? And narrow loss. And I know I was rooting for you. Most of us were probably rooting for you. And you weren't in my district. Otherwise, I definitely would have voted for you and knocked on doors for you. But and after that race, then you took a job as Ottawa County Administrator, correct? And
Yep.
so I'd like to let you kind of take it from there and tell the story kind of from that point forward. So
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Scott, for having me on. Really appreciate it, and glad to be able to have this conversation today. So yeah, you kind of outlined that I came in as Ottawa County Administrator right January 3rd, 2023. That was the first day that the new commissioners they were sworn in, and they took office that day. And so they took several actions that day. One is getting rid of the previous lawyers and bringing in the new lawyers, who we'll talk about in a little bit, and getting rid of the previous county administrator and bringing me in. And, I was very excited to do it. I had gotten to know many of the Ottawa Impact commissioners during my campaign, and we were on very good terms. I liked what they stood for. I loved the platform they had. I loved how they were standing up against the COVID lockdowns and everything that had gone wrong. And so I really liked what they stood for and was excited to work for them and really excited to make a difference. And so when they voted on their first day in office, they voted to bring me in as county administrator. I was really happy about that. And so I was excited to come in and get to work. And I really looked forward to leveraging everything I had learned in our administration, working under President Trump and Dr. Carson, and really bringing as much of that to the table as I could and plugging away. And so I came in and began doing that to the best of my abilities. It went well for a while. For a little while there, things are moving along, but throughout the course of my time there in the first several months, I started to notice some issues. One is that the board happened to hire new county attorneys, as I mentioned. Well, the county attorneys I hired were personal family friends of the chair, Joe Moss, which is kind of problematic because it's one thing to hire somebody you can trust. I think everybody understands that, but it's also got to be a person that has experience in that area and knows how to do the job. That's a pretty important component of things. And what I started to notice is that, while the Coleman legal group, who they brought in, were pretty good at the things that they were specializing in, such as defending schools who are getting attacked, over LGBT policies or over COVID policies. That was kind of their wheelhouse. I think they're fine at that. When it came to municipal law, which is a law that governs counties and whatnot, there's a lot of issues. That is a very specific area of law you really need some deep experience in order to be able to engage at that level. And I started noticing that they didn't really have a lot of depth there. And so I reached out to some of the board leadership and I said, we've got an issue here. Can we talk about it? And I kind of proposed some solutions to that. I think that was in March of 23. And I think I've sent you and many others that actual email I sent them saying, here are the problems I noticed. Can I get some solutions? Heard absolutely nothing back. Nothing was done except, oh, everything's fine. What are you talking about? Everything's great. So then a few months later, I sent them another letter, a longer 4-page letter, which you also have as well. And it was very professional. There's no ego or personal agendas here. It was just, look, in the operations of the county, which you, the board, have hired me to do, I'm noticing a big problem that is hindering things. And that is that the functioning of our legal office, called Corporation Counsel, is what it's called, not working so well. And so I proposed keeping the Colemans on for litigation, but maybe hiring new attorneys for the other functions of Corporation Counsel, such as reviewing contracts and reviewing policies and things like that. And so they were not happy about that at all. I mean, I was about to be tarred and feathered for bringing up that concern. And that's kind of when things really started to go south. And then from then on, it only got worse. There was a whole $4 million debacle where they were going to pay the health officer $4 million to leave. One of their campaign promises was to get rid of the health officer because of the way that COVID was handled. But the problem is they didn't really understand the legal way to do it. They just kind of did it off impulse, which is a very common pattern you see in how they operate. Another pattern which, Scott, you observed, and I think you really articulated well, is that, often they will operate based on the way they think the law should be instead of the way it actually is. And so they'll think in their head, we should be able to get rid of this person. Why does it have to be this complicated? So let's just do it. Well, I agree that you should be able to, but that's different than the way the law actually exists. Right. Those two are not the same thing, but I don't know they really grasp that difference. And so it ended up being a nightmare for them trying to get rid of her, and she sued them, and then they're having to be in court all the time. They ended up spending upwards of $200,000 in legal fees to the Colemans trying to get rid of her, and then only to about 1 month ago hold a vote to keep her and not get rid of her after spending all that money trying to get rid of her. Right. And then it gets worse, because in part of that agreement, they said she has a right to go to court and ask for her legal fees to be paid. Well, she did that 2 days ago, just this week, and is asking for $370,000 in legal expenses and fees to be paid for. And right. So we will see if the judge grants her that, which she could, because they kind of agree to that in the right. deal they came up with. They also agreed to binding arbitration, which means she cannot really be disciplined at all, because they have to go to binding arbitration in order to do so, which takes forever and is going to be a nightmare process. So they basically gave up management rights, and she's going to be able to do whatever she wants in there. So just a huge, long series of really bad decisions. And every time I would, very gently and professionally say, maybe we shouldn't do this privately. I'm not trying to go to the public and blast them when I was administrator. I didn't do that. I never went public when I shared my concerns with them. I kept it private. I said, look, we can't be trying to give away $4 million. It's not the right thing to do. You got to check into the law for how you get rid of a health officer. You can't just do it the way that you think it works in your head. But, they just wanted to keep barreling down that path. And many other issues besides that. I tried to change the county's hiring policies, because the HR department had a death grip on hiring. It was quite remarkable what they have achieved there in terms of having that, like Saddam Hussein-like grip. So I said, let's make this more fair and transparent and give the administrator and the board even a little bit of a say in the process of hiring and how it's done. And I proposed that policy, but they just didn't understand. They don't have any experience in government. They don't really have experience in senior management or executive management within an organization. So the board just doesn't know how this stuff works, and they really were quite clueless on many things. So it ended up being a tough slog, and near the end, it really came to a head, and they decided to try to go after me in a very unethical way, which I believe there will be justice served there. So that's kind of a real quick rundown of what happened.
Yeah, that's good. So Melanie says, John is absolutely spot on. This new wave of activists believe the end goal justifies the unjust means. That's really well put. And,
yep.
And that is, you mentioned several different patterns there that I just want to underscore. So one is driving out and ignoring, boxing out the most competent people in the organization. This is something that Christina Caramo, her 11 months of her administration, there are well over a dozen of the most competent people. And one of the qualities of somebody that's competent is that they ask questions, they challenge assumptions, and
Right.
and they want to make sure that that what they're doing is right and aligned with what is true
Right.
and
Yep.
fact. And but what these people value most is loyalty. And
Right.
so if they believe that those questions, those kinds of challenges, are disloyalty. They equate that with disloyalty, and so they can't tolerate it. And they tend to go to very brutal means in order to achieve that. To try to force loyalty.
Yeah.
Whether so, did you experience that?
Yeah, just to underscore your point there, sorry to interject. When we had the meeting where I had my 4-page letter with concerns about the lawyers, what you described, it's amazing. It's almost like you were there because that's exactly what happened. I took the time to spend hours and hours very carefully drafting my concerns to make sure it didn't seem like I was attacking anybody because I wasn't. I was literally bringing up legitimate concerns. So we sit there and I go over them, and then where the commissioners immediately comes in, we have to stick together. We have to stick together. We can't go. I'm like, okay, I agree with that, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about not sticking together. I'm talking about a real concern with the functioning of the county, which you have hired me to look at. And so they immediately, Scott, just as you said, went to this loyalty aspect of things where you're not one of us, you're not sticking together. And then the second thing that came up, which I might have mentioned before, is that one of the commissioners actually said, maybe the devil got to you. Maybe you're under some kind of spiritual attack, and that's why you wrote this, because the devil got to you. And I'm like, wow, so that's where we're at now. But
Right.
yeah, to your point, yeah, if you're not lockstep in what they're demanding, then it's a matter of you're not loyal, and maybe even you're on Satan's team now if you ask any questions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They do that all the time. I've been I've been called satanic, in not just in Michigan, but in Arizona and South
Right.
Carolina. The only reason why I haven't been called that in other states yet is because they don't know me well enough yet.
Sure.
I haven't done
Yeah.
enough to expose them yet. Um,
Mhm.
and so yeah, so that is and they also, they probably had this experience as well that you did, that they use scripture as a weapon against their
Yeah.
political opponents, and they use it also as a weapon against their own followers as a tool of manipulation. And so I don't know
Yes.
if you had an experience with that.
I do actually. I was trying to recall at that meeting where the person said maybe the devil got to me. I'm trying to remember there was a Bible verse associated with that. There very may well have been, but yeah, I mean they'll pick and choose the verses that back up the point of view that they're trying to make at that point, and then they'll misapply it and say, "See, this is why what we're doing is right because I found a Bible verse that says what we're doing is okay." And that also
Right.
means you're against me. Then you're against the Bible because I just threw out this verse. So how could you be against that?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's used as a tool to advance their own agenda as opposed to what it's meant for. The Word of God stands on its own; it's high above anything else. It is not meant to be manipulated by anyone for our own petty purposes.
That's
But
right.
they do that, and they use it as a tool. It's very unfortunate.
Yep. Yep. We've got a few more good comments here. Trump 24 said Joe Moss is who nominated Christina Caramo at the MIGOP convention. I didn't know that. That's
Mhm.
interesting. So that would be the February 23 convention when she was elected. Um, quite clueless. Yes. Well put, John. They demand loyalty. And um, so this is an interesting question. So Left of Center says, is there dissent among the Ottawa Impact Commissioners, or do they seem to be in lockstep?
I think that they are fairly in lockstep. I mean, that is one thing that they do. Um, that they execute well, I suppose, is they getting everybody on the same team. However, it is interesting when they had their vote recently to appoint an interim county administrator after what they did to me. That vote was not lockstep. I believe that Commissioner Cosby and maybe one other did not vote for Joe Moss's pick to replace or to have an interim county administrator. So that was kind of interesting. But for the most part, they do vote in lockstep. One interesting thing I found here, Scott, is that one of the Ottawa Impact commissioners, Roger Belknap, I have heard is on the payroll of Joe Moss.
Really?
And he doesn't come. That's what I've heard. I haven't gone and fully verified that.
Wow.
And he's not super wealthy like some of the other ones. So If Joe Moss is writing your paycheck, guess what? You now can no longer disagree, or else your
Right.
family's financial security is at stake. And I was frankly kind of surprised that Commissioner Belknap for going along with all this, because he struck me as one of the more decent ones. But when I think about the fact that he may be on Joe Moss's payroll, it starts to make sense. He literally now cannot dissent at all and has to go along with it, even if he knows it's not right for the financial security of his family, which is a big conflict of interest. And basically, it's a kind of corruption.
That is a pretty shocking piece of information. So, a couple more here. Thank you, John Gibbs, for being transparent, and I really appreciate that. Also, Joe Welsh, Melanie says, Joe Welsh told my friend that I'm a sister of Satan. Yes, I mean, just about everyone that I've spoken to has had that experience with these people, and it's fascinating. Just to kind of draw out your point a little bit further, that that they use the Bible in this way, as a weapon, but they do that also to justify behavior that is completely contradictory to what Christ teaches, to justify vengeance and hatred and vindictiveness. And that's just such a clear sign that this is in fact a cult. I mean, this is not a Christian. This does not represent the Bible. This does not represent Christianity, what they are doing. And I think that really needs to be made clear, because they claim to represent Christianity. They claim to be Christian nationalists, and whatever it is that means, they're taking the Christian out of that. So,
Absolutely. Yep.
And so, Leftist Center says Belknap is on the For Liberty payroll. Is that what you're alleging there?
I don't know. I haven't gone into the details of that yet. That's something that I think someone should look into and trace down where the money goes. But that is just something I heard at any rate. And it seems to, again, Belknap seemed like a very decent guy. He's someone I respected and was a lot more reasonable than many of the other ones. So, it seems to be consistent with the turn in behavior that I'm seeing. And maybe that's one reason, but I don't know the full details on that.
Yeah. So, Leftist Center, I know you've done you have been doing some research on Ottawa Impact, and if you find anything about that, let me know and I'll help get it out. So, another thing that I want to ask you about, I was reading an article. I told you this before we started. I was reading an article about just kind of doing some research before we started. And there was an article, and I'll link to it in the show notes, but it was a couple weeks ago in the Holland Sentinel, and it was talking about Jordan Epperson, who was he was your closest aide. Is that right? What was his?
That's what I heard him for. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it talked about how he was hired, and that there is apparently a lawsuit, at least being threatened by another applicant for age discrimination, because there was a on paper higher qualified, somebody who met more of the qualifications of the job qualifications, who was older. And he is apparently either threatening litigation or there's actually an active suit. But so Jordan Epperson, and there was one quote of yours in there that really grabbed my attention, and is towards the bottom of the article. And it said that, because he really turned and stabbed you in the back. And I want to ask you about that in a minute. But and the accusations that he made against you. But Jordan Peterson, it said that because they were asking why you had hired him, and let me just turn that down. Hang on. I don't even know. Okay. Can you still hear me? I just want to make sure we're good.
Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Shoot, hang on. I can't hear you now. Let me just change. I gotta. All right.
Sure. How about now?
I think that's better. Okay. I want to make sure maybe they'll still come. But so Jordan Epperson, it said in there that you had hired him because of just a preponderance of advice that you got, that you were given so much advice to hire him, and to overlook past comments that he had made when he was quite a bit. And he's young. He's what, 23?
I think so.
Yeah. So the comments that he made some time ago on social media, probably when he was a teenager, I don't know, that appeared to be anti-Semitic and racist type comments. And so you chose to heed the advice of state legislatures, or state legislator, or more, the people within the state legislature, and others, that really encouraged you to hire him. And I did a little bit of research on that. Like who was Jordan Epperson working with in the state legislature? And it was Neil Frisky. And Neil Frisky is he has been one of Christina Cramo's strongest supporters, even after she was removed and on January 6th. And Trump held a rally after Hoekstra was elected on January 20th. It was sometime after that Trump came out to Michigan for a little mini rally. And I've spoken with, I don't know, half a dozen people who were there in the front 3 rows. And Neil Frisky was, I believe he's in the 3rd row. And he was there with Dakota Sawyer, who's his chief of staff. And I'll talk about Dakota Sawyer in a minute. But Neil Frisky at this event, he actually booed Trump. And I have a picture of him, and I'll post this in the show notes too, where he stuck his tongue out at Trump.
Wow.
And so, but Dakota this is a really important thing. So Dakota Sawyer is not even from Michigan. A year ago, less than a year ago, I think in the last 6 or 8 months, he came here from Ohio, and he was involved in politics in Ohio. He ran for office. I think he ran for state rep, and then he withdrew. But he is a very close associate with Robert Owens. Robert Owens is a mysterious figure that I've written about quite a bit, that was very close with Christina Caramo, and reportedly, from what I've heard, is that he was also, he very likely knew and knows Mike Labadie. So, and Mike Labadie is the shadow operator that I've reported on quite a bit, who really ran Christina Caramo's campaign and also ran the Michigan Republican Party from behind the scenes. And so this draws a connection between Neil Frisky and Mike Labadie and potentially Jordan Epperson. And so there's the backstory. This is why that quote just jumped out at me, like, oh, who's this legislator? And here we go. So I'd like to know from you now, John, if that's where your recommendation came from, why you ended up hiring him, and then how he turned and what he did. And we'll go from there.
Sure, yeah. So I think the article that you found gave some of the story there, but there's a few interesting other elements there. There are certain people in the circle of Ottawa Impact supporters that I knew who actually worked with Jordan in the legislature as staffers. And they recommended him and said that he did really good work and things. So that was a big part of it. I was able to call one of those folks and say, look, tell me about Jordan. And this person, based on working with him, who someone that I trusted, very highly recommended him, not just as some random person, but again, as someone who actually worked with him on a close basis. So that really meant a lot. And I'll also point out that Jordan actually did do well during his interview. I mean, I had all the applicants do a PowerPoint presentation, and he did the best in his presentation. I had him do a writing assignment. He did the best in his writing assignment. He also answered the questions that I asked and the other panelists asked. I think he answered the questions better than any other applicants. And the gentleman who is suing, claiming age discrimination, I think it's hogwash. That person had no experience in the state or local government at all. He had zero, and he did not do as well in his PowerPoint presentation. He did not do as well in his writing assignment. So he, I believe, objectively, age aside, was nowhere near the top of the applicant pool, which is why I did not choose him. So the claim of age discrimination is false. The backstory here, Scott, that I haven't talked about a lot is the HR director says, oh, are you hiring him just because of age? She was doing that, I believe, because prior to this, I had proposed a new a new hiring policy, as I mentioned earlier, for the county that would take away some of the dictatorial hiring process power from HR and redistribute it. I think the HR director felt threatened by that, and as a result of it, tried to play this game with age discrimination stuff. I believe that is what happened here, because that's where this really came from. So I think you're seeing political games being played with this whole accusation that is out there. So it's total garbage. But back to your point, yeah, Jordan did well in his interview, but he was heavily recommended by people, staffers in the state legislature. And when they gave their recommendations for him, I think Representative Frisky was one that did, as well as a few others, recommend him. So that's kind of how it went down as far as hiring him. Mm-hmm.
And so then what happened? So, he ended up, or at least what the board claimed, is that the reason why they fired you is because of accusations that he made against you. Is that correct?
Yes, and so I never had any issues with Jordan. We never. I met with him every week, a one-on-one meeting. I said, Jordan, how are things going? And I specifically asked him every meeting. I said, what can I be doing better? Can you tell me what I can be doing? Then, if he had anything that I wanted him to improve on, I'd say, Jordan, if you could, get on top of this thing, ask you, or we could meet tomorrow on this. And it was good. It was a good relationship, I thought, and he was able to bring me any concerns he had. And he never did that. And the timeline of this is important. So on February 15th, my attorney wrote the Board of Commissioners a 9-page letter, very good letter, saying why they legally cannot fire me. And I have not done anything wrong. And it was only after that, only after they got the letter from my attorney on February 15th, that they came up with these accusations. They said, okay, we better come up with something to get rid of this guy. It's pretext, basically, and it's retaliation. So then the very next week, 1 week after that, February 22nd, they hold a meeting and they say, we're going to go into closed session. And I say, okay. And then they go, here are the accusations against you. I had never seen these ever before. Never before in my life have I heard any of these accusations. Never were they ever presented a HR against me. Never was any complaint ever done. These are completely concocted, brand new, and they throw them at me in this meeting. I've never seen it before. And they're going through reading them one by one, and they're saying, what's your answer? I'm like, well, you know what? I'll talk to my attorney first, and I'll give you written responses. And they're like, well, we want to know now. What's your answer? And I'm like, well, I've never seen these ever before in my entire life. This is the first time I'm seeing these. So I need time to look at this and formulate my response with my attorney. So I'm not going to give you an answer right now, literally 4 minutes after you just read these things to me. And so it is something they came up with only after the fact, which is just a terrible look for them in terms of how the timeline went down. So, you never know what happened as far as why Jordan and also Ben Wetmore flipped. Maybe their jobs are threatened. I don't know. Maybe they were scared they were going to get fired by the board if they didn't cooperate with what the board is trying to do to me. I don't know. It's hard to get inside the head, of them. But a lot of these, pretty much every accusation on there was false or distorted. I think there are a couple that ended up being true, such as I did do a bug sweep of my office. That's true. I had a professional bug sweeper come in, and that's something that's standardly done. That's not uncommon in the government. And in fact, Jordan and Ben helped me find the person to do it. They never once expressed any disagreement with doing that at all. In fact, they enthusiastically helped. Now they're going to try to come back and attack me for that, even though they fully agreed and never at any point expressed any hesitation. So it's a concocted list. It's just quite bizarre. I don't know exactly why they flipped. Again, maybe they thought that their job was in jeopardy, or the Board of Commissioners might retaliate against them if they didn't participate in this thing against me. I don't know. But what I do know is the accusations they're making were total hogwash. Some of them are quite comical when you read through. And yeah, but this is, again, an example of how they operate. Absolute loyalty. You will never question me, or I will do anything at all, no matter how despicable, to destroy you. And another aspect of all this, again, February 22nd, they called me into a closed session. Ostensibly, the reason, and I didn't suggest that, they did. Ostensibly, the reason you do a closed session is to keep this private. So they're not going to go out there and trash me in public with what this list they came up with. So I thought that was their plan. Maybe they were going to actually show some decorum, and not publicly attack me with these accusations, which I've never seen before. But literally 24 hours later, 24 hours, the next day, that was a Friday, Joe Moss puts these accusations on his website and on his social media for the entire public to see, even though he had just done a closed session the day before. Right. To me, that was one of the most despicable things I've ever seen in my entire career, to do to someone who was ostensibly on your side. It was just unbelievable that he would go to that length and do that. And let me also say that when this whole stuff started unraveling in early January, I offered to make a deal. I said, you guys claim you don't want me here, even though you don't have any evidence and there's never been any issues. Okay, well, let's make a deal and do this in a peaceful way and an amicable way. That is the way this stuff is done every day around the country. If you want someone to leave, you come up with a deal, you sign papers saying you're both going to stay quiet about it. You give them a year or whatever, or 2 years, 3 years of pay, and you say, let's part ways here and keep it quiet and do it amicably. That is the standard practice for how this is done. If you ask any labor attorney who's done this stuff, that's how it's done. You don't sit there and publicly wage a nuclear war on someone and then just try to get rid of them, in a reckless fashion. But this is a great illustration. They don't know how the government works at all. They don't care that they don't know. It's about, if you're against me, then I'm going to destroy you and ground you to pieces. And I think in this case, it's not going to work out for them, and they're going to end up regretting it.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so. It's not how the business world works either, and that's the crazy. Right. Yeah. It's not how any functional adult works.
True. Good point. Yeah,
Yeah,
even in business, it's not that way either. And apparently they just don't know that or don't
right,
care about that at all.
right, because most of these people have never accomplished anything real in their lives beforehand. Um,
That's
so
right.
a couple good questions here. So Trump 24 says, was it Rachel Atwood who also used to work for Rep Neil Frisky? She's now filed to run for county commissioner in Ottawa County.
Yeah, Rachel was someone I liked. She was someone that I trusted, and I ran into her at various points throughout my campaign. So she was someone that who was judgment I trusted, and she did work with Jordan in the legislature, and her recommendation means a lot because she's someone that's well respected out there and someone that I respected. And so she said he's good people, very good guy, very sharp. And so when she said that, that really meant a lot. So yeah, yeah, she was part of the picture there.
Yeah. Um, it, it's one of those things that it's hard to get people to be honest about Mike Labadie.
Oh wow.
And yeah, I would love to be a fly on the wall back in time a little bit, and just to see if there was any sort of involvement there. Just when people do things that don't really make a lot of sense, and they seem to they seem to be really good people, and then they come out of left field with these weird actions. That's a pattern that's unfolded repeatedly here in Michigan and in other states, where I've heard so many times, I I was friends with this person. I thought this person really had integrity and was a really good person, and then all of a sudden they behave in ways that just don't make any sense, and using the same kind of patterns that you're talking about. All right.
Right.
Left of
Mhm.
Center says, why is the board refusing to fund the Ottawa food coordinator position? Do they not realize how awful it makes them look? I saw a video about that too. So is that something you can speak to?
Well, that's something that's been happening since I left. I know they discussed this in one of their recent meetings when I wasn't there. So I don't know the latest and what's happened there. I do know that with this whole Ottawa food issue, there has been a bit of gamesmanship between the health department and the board. I do think the health department is playing politics to some degree here in claiming that they don't have money for this coordinator position. This position could easily be done by a volunteer as well. The money issue is not what's holding it back. So I do think that the health department is throwing a curveball here. And one of the interesting aspects to tie all this stuff together is, again, the board made a deal to keep the health officer after spending over $200,000 trying to fire her. And part of the deal they signed has binding arbitration for any discipline issues. So they're not going to be able to resolve this issue easily at all. She's going to keep bringing it up and using it for whatever purpose. And instead of being able to sit down with her, they're going to have to go to binding arbitration, which is a total and complete nightmare. And so they've really locked themselves into a bad position. It's horrible governance. It's not how you run an organization. But again, they don't care and they don't know. So I do think this whole Ottawa food issue is part of the gamesmanship that is going on back and forth. And again, if you step back and look at even the bigger picture, if they would have a more mature and less adversarial and I'm going to grind you to the ground if you don't agree with me type attitude, I believe they could probably work out something with a health officer where you could have a more amicable relationship. But because they don't have the maturity to do that, it's this adversarial thing where they're coming in saying, you need to fund our position, and the board is saying, we're not going to do this. And I heard that meeting, which I wasn't there, was pretty adversarial. And that's just a typical example of how they're operating and don't really have the maturity to go, and I can do that. And in
Right.
fact, if you look at the concocted complaints that they had against me, one of the fascinating complaints in there is that he's too nice to the directors and won't fire them. And I'm like, oh, you mean I can't go into my senior staff and treat them like garbage?
Right.
Really? You
Pick up
expect me
the
to do
curb
that?
for no reason.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. I want to get along with my staff, and of course, we'll drive the agenda. But there's a way you bring people on board, and it's a way of respect and building a relationship over time, letting them know that you're not trying to cut their head off. Once you have that established, you can work with people to do your agenda. But again, they don't know that. They don't know anything about how organizations operate. They don't know anything about executive management. They don't know about change management. How do you deal with people who are in a stressful situation, like the staff, and how do you bring them on board and build trust? They don't know anything about that. And in fact, if they see me trying to do that, they think that I'm now on the bad guy's side and maybe the devil got to me and all that stuff because it's voodoo magic to them when you try to do things the right way. They just don't know how to do it. So this whole Ottawa food issue is just an example of that.
Good. And yeah, Melanie says that she believes that is a violation of the Open Meetings Act. I think that might be the publicizing of the complaints against you. Maybe that's what she's
Yeah, I
talking.
mean that's a very good point. I mean, they did this in closed session, ostensibly to protect the privacy of it, or it's something that is covered under the law.
Right.
for OMA for a closed session. They go and bring it open. That very well could be. I mean, that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Um, so I'd like to talk more about, since we're kind of close to that subject anyways, talk more about this $4 million just insanity, how that all came about. And yeah, that's just mind blowing. Like how did they agree to that? Why? And then all of a sudden they back out of it. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
So help us with that.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the issue that was a straw that broke the camel's back. And the way it went down is unbelievable. So they have this meeting. So they're having this closed session meeting to try to resolve this health officer issue. By the way, they didn't want me in there. And in this kind of situation, in any county in Michigan or America, you would always have the county administrator in these meetings, always. But they didn't want me in there. And so I'm not in the meeting. And it goes on forever and ever and ever. And then they come out and they have this motion that they vote on after the closed session, and it says to accept the recommendation of legal counsel regarding the Hambley case. Kind of vague. It's like what X went on, and actually, it was probably an improper motion because you're not supposed to vote on things that are that vague as a legislative body. But anyway, they did that. So, well, it comes out the next day in the news. They ordered legal to draft up a deal to pay the health officer $4 million to leave.
Wow.
We have the actual court papers. We have the actual emails back and forth. We have the PDF. They told the lawyers to draft up $4 million to get her to leave. That is an actual fact. And so, I'm
So
like,
easy
wow,
to
that's
do
kind of
that with
interesting.
other people's money, right? It's
Right,
just
right.
mind blowing. All
So,
right.
so then what happens is Chair Moss has a meeting apparently, I guess on Thursdays with his closest supporters. Which is called a quote unquote prayer meeting, I understand, which goes back to the point mentioned, really, prayer meeting. That's interesting. This is just your political agenda that you're pushing, but you're trying to guise it under the, pretext of a quote unquote prayer meeting. That's quite funny. But anyway, they say he almost got tarred and feathered at that meeting for the $4 million. All the Ottawa Impact supporters were basically ready to flip, and they lost. I know that they lost donations. They lost supporters when they heard about the $4 million. You gave $4 million. You offered $4 million. So then Joe decided to change his tune. He says, there never was a $4 million. It's fake. It's fake news. There never was a $4 million. Fake news. Fake news. And so that was his new thing. This is not real. So I'm like, alrighty. So then he tries to tell me there never was a $4 million. Don't believe it. Fake news. I said, Joe, I have the email that you asked the lawyers to write up the $4 million deal. Right. It's in there, clear as daylight. $4 million. I said, Joe, it looks like you did offer the $4 million. Oh no, it's fake news, fake news. See, it was just an ongoing process. That's what I call shucking and jiving. See, you don't understand what really happened. See, I know you think you know, but no. See, like, and going on and on and on and on. And it's okay. So then, fast forward a little bit later, the health officer gets her attorney to come back and continue litigation. The judge actually gets to see the closed session minutes from what went on in that closed session to settle this once and for all. Well, guess what the judge says? The judge says clear as daylight, they agreed to the $4 million in the closed session. They agreed to it. The judge said it. The judge read the closed session minutes. However, the board got off on a technicality. The vote that they took after the closed session, which I just mentioned earlier, was too vague to enforce the $4 million. So they were saved by their own incompetence. Their inability to craft a proper motion after the closed session saved them from having to enforce what they agreed to, which was the $4 million. And so we ended up having another meeting with the insurance authority. That's the county's insurance body, which the administrator is a member of that. So I'm at the meeting, and then I asked some really hard questions. I said, we can't pay the $4 million. That's a very bad move for the county. It's going to hurt our insurance rates. It's going to hurt our AAA bond rating. This is just a nightmare. We cannot agree to this. And I believe Joe was there and a couple other commissioners and the county lawyers who, again, do not really know how this stuff works at all. They were hired because of their connections, not because of their ability. And they didn't like when I said that. They really didn't like it. And that's one of the complaints against me they had in their list of concocted allegations that, wow, he asked some real tough questions at the insurance meeting about the $4 million. I said, heck yes, I did. That's what you hired me to do, is to ask those kind of questions and protect the taxpayers. I have to protect the taxpayers. And I can't let money be spent in that way to the best of my ability. So that's kind of how the $4 million went down. And if you remember, in the meeting on February 22nd, which they called to discuss the allegations against me, one of the things that Joe Moss said as he opened the meeting is that we were disappointed that John Gibbs did not accept my explanation of the $4 million. He actually said that at the meeting in public. So he tries to say that it's fake news. And I said, actually, it isn't fake news. I have the literal emails and court documents that you agree to it. Well, he didn't like that, and he said that I wasn't, I guess, playing ball. Same thing we said earlier. You have to absolutely agree, or else I'm going to destroy you. So he actually said that out loud. But yeah, that $4 million issue was probably one of the main reasons that they um, said we need someone who's going to drink our Kool-Aid 100% no matter what, and he ain't going to do it. So he's got to get out of here.
Wow. Wow. Um, that's just a crazy story. All right. So
Yeah.
we have a few more comments here. Sharon Laleo says voodoo magic. Yep. And I think that was really well put. There's so many examples of that. Um, Sherry says it's not the health officer, it's Moss. He doesn't understand that the poor are starving. Yeah. I, I we're delving into, I don't know. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think there's plenty of blame to go around on both sides of this issue. I think there's some grandstanding happening from the health department. I think there's also a lack of negotiation ability on behalf of the board of commissioners. So I think they both are playing. This problem is easily solvable. I mean, they could solve this tomorrow. That coordinator position could be handled so many ways. You could get a volunteer. You could get all the groups that participate in Ottawa Food to chip in and fund the coordinator if you want it to be a paid position. If they both sat down, they could solve this issue in an hour. But they're both sitting there playing games, and so it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, and I can see that there's we do that right and left, and and these these disruptors do that within the party, where they dig into their position, and everybody else is the enemy, and they're just trying to gain leverage and damage each other politically.
Right.
And that's happening here on both sides. So you have two different sides that are wanting to do that to each other. And the truth tends to be somewhere in the middle, but they don't want to compromise with each other. So,
Yep.
uh,
Mhm.
Kinda says, is anyone running against Joe Moss or the other commissioners? Is that something that you know about?
The last I saw in the news, I think there's folks running against several of them. I think the deadline to file is approximately April 23rd or something like
I
that.
think correct. Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll see who throws their hat in the ring. But I believe that the mayor of Hudsonville, if I recall correctly, is running against Joe Moss.
Mm.
And I believe that someone is running against Commissioner Cosby. I don't know if anyone has filed against Allison Miedema yet. But yeah, we'll have to see. I haven't been keeping too close to track
Right.
of
You're
what's
talking
going
about
on.
on the Republican side. So, for the primary.
Yes, yes. Mhm.
Yeah. Good. Um, Left of center says, sorry if this was covered. How was Nate Kelly chosen? I think that's a great question. Really quick though, before we get into that, there's one question because we were talking about Jordan Epperson, and I don't want to cycle too far forward.
Sure.
So to the best of your knowledge, is Jordan Epperson still working with Ottawa or with the Ottawa County? I mean, is he still there?
The last I knew, I guess the last I really knew was when I interacted with him in late February with the commissioners. He was still there.
Mhm.
I haven't checked recently. If something happened in the last 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, I wouldn't know about that. So I don't know. But at least last time I was aware of things, he was there.
So as of 3 weeks ago, and he was living there too, obviously, in that
Yeah, I
area,
believe. Yeah, he lives in the Ottawa County. Yep.
right?
At least last I knew. Yep.
Yeah, so I asked that because as I was looking, I um, I noticed that he just filed to run for state rep in Port Huron,
Wow.
and
Wow. That is
and
quite a shock.
yeah, I'm pretty sure you've got to be living there for 30 days before you um, you actually file. And Port Huron is I mean, it's the complete opposite end of the state. So
Yeah, literally totally opposite side. Yep.
he's actually been commuting for a month. I don't know. Somebody ought to look into that.
All I remember is the last I knew when he was working for me, he definitely lived in Ottawa County. He did not
Okay,
live in Port Huron.
right. Interesting. Fascinating. Okay, so now let's go on to Nate Kelly because so Nate Kelly was who Joe Moss wanted to replace the health director with. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so obviously he wasn't hired because they ended up retaining her, the
Right.
health director. So tell us about Nate Kelly.
Well, they suggested Nate Kelly at the very beginning, and his background. He works more on like industrial hygiene type stuff. as opposed to the kind of field that public health does. So a little bit off. Maybe he might technically meet the requirements, but just a little bit off. But more importantly than that, I started to hear from certain people, especially more recently, that maybe he was not the best choice. I ran into someone just a couple of weeks ago, and this is not someone who necessarily hates the commissioners or myself. This is someone who will be inclined to be aligned with us. And they said, I used to work with Nate Kelly, and my first indication that something was off in Ottawa County was when they recommended him to be that health officer, because he didn't seem like a person that would be well suited towards that role. So that is something that someone actually shared with me recently, and it was quite interesting.
Because he wasn't qualified for the job, or
this individual said that that Nate would often just sit there playing games on his phone at work, and I was like, wow. And essentially, because several months ago, I was talking with some of the commissioners about this, and this feedback came in as well from someone that they had concerns about putting him in there. But so there's that. And, the reason is because Nate Kelly's wife, as you know, is Christian Megan Kelly, who was very, very outspoken activist for the Ottawa Impact Commissioners. She's very close to them. And, she did great work during COVID. I give her credit for that. I mean, she stood up against the lockdowns, and, and she really was a great voice for that. So I give her great credit for that. But they chose Nate Kelly, ostensibly, I believe, because he was her husband, and they're all about choosing loyalists. They don't so much care if you know how to do the job or not. With me, it's interesting. I was thinking about this last night. I think they got really lucky because they chose someone who was loyal, but also who knew how to do the job, which for them is a very rare thing. But with most of their picks, they get the loyalty, but they don't get someone who knows how to do the job. So I believe they picked Nate Kelly because of his connection to Christian Megan Kelly, who's one of their biggest supporters. They believe he's someone who will do whatever they told him to do. And they're not so concerned necessarily with if the person do the job or they have the background for it. They're more concerned with absolute loyalty, and if the person's going to ask them any questions or anything like that. So I think that's why they picked him.
So Christian Megan Kelly, and I am familiar with her because I've been looking into Stand Up Michigan, and especially the leadership, which is Ron Armstrong and Tammy Clark. And from what I gather on social media, Tammy Clark and Christian Megan Kelly are very close friends. And so it just forms another connection here between these disruptor organizations, and because Ottawa Impact is clearly a GOP disruptor organization, and so we have this connection, another connection between them and Stand Up Michigan. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to share that. I get along with Stand Up Kent fine. I mean, I get along with Tammy Clark great. She hasn't attacked me and things like that. And again, I respect the work they did on the COVID lockdown stuff. That was really heroic. But I think that with the rise of Ottawa Impact type stuff, certain good people, we have alliances. I supported Ottawa Impact. I love what they were doing. I love what they stood for, as I was running for Congress and as I first came into the administrative position. But again, as things went on, the true colors came out. I haven't necessarily seen Tammy do a lot of anything like bad as far as what I've seen, but everybody's connected. It's kind of a small world and the political sphere here. So, but that is very interesting connection to point out. But with the Nate Kelly thing, it's just, and that's not the only time that's happened. If you look at a lot of, if you look at some of the countywide races that are happening and who they're endorsing in some of these races, you see a similar pattern with this picking someone who's a loyalist, which again, everybody understands picking someone you can trust, but they got to know how to do the job too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've got another comment here from Sherry. Sorry, the health department is not playing games. I think that I would almost guarantee that Joe Moss would say the same thing about himself. And sure. that doesn't mean that I'm not, by saying that, I'm not saying the health department is definitely playing games. I'm just saying that there are reasons why the two sides aren't coming together, and it's not 100% to blame on either side. So there is mutual responsibility. I'm sure. I think that you're right. I mean, it's just like a marriage. There's always some mutual responsibility. And so, yeah, I this is something I personally don't know enough about to take a side one way or the other. I definitely defer more to you because you've been in the depth of that, John. Is there anything else you want to say to that?
No, I think I've kind of addressed it. It's just an unfortunate situation.
Sure. Melanie, thank you. Please subscribe to Scott's reporting. He's been a godsend to get the word out on what is happening in our state. And that's my bigger biggertruth.substack.com. And yes, I would be very grateful for your support. And that's not my name. Says, what did you think of the current health officer? Was your working relationship with what was your relationship with her like?
I got along with Addie. Her name is Addie. Fine. I really never really had any major issues. I kind of feel like if the overall context between the board and her had been different, it would have been able to be a good working relationship. I don't think that a health officer is some kind of like liberal activist, for example. I don't think that's where she's at. I think she has been in there for a while. And one of the things you do see in Ottawa County governments is they're very resistant to change. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I mean, they're very threatened by any kind of change, no matter how small. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is simply that, as opposed to left or right politics. It's just that they're resistant to change. Again, the board doesn't understand that. They don't know management. They don't know organizations. They don't know executive management. They don't understand change management. They don't understand the process of policy making. They don't understand the process of building consensus. They don't understand how to build trust coming into a new organization. They don't know any of this stuff. They don't know anything about it. So they're not able to even grasp or deal with these kind of issues. But I think if they had the maturity to view this as simply, a traditional organization that hasn't changed much over the past decades, and they're a little bit threatened by any kind of change, if you know that as a manager, you can manage to that successfully. But if I try to do that, they say I'm being too nice or all that kind of thing. So I think a lot of what we're looking at is simply that issue playing out.
Well, that's good. And that's kind of, what you just said is that's a good example of responsible governance. You got to be willing to work with people that disagree with you and
Right.
find, seek out common ground. And so all right, so let's go. The Lapeer County Tribune says, what is Mr. Gibbs' suggestion to the voters to fix these issues? That's a good question.
At this point, I'm inclined to say you got to get rid of the current crop. I was talking to a friend the other day who doesn't work for government, works for a private company. He was saying something along the lines of, we spend $2.5 million a month on legal fees and settlements. And then he had another friend who worked for a bigger company. He's like, that's all you guys spend? We're way more on that stuff. Now, those are private companies, but the reason I mention that is if you keep the current crop of commissioners in there, they're going to get to a situation where they're going to be spending huge amounts of money every month on lawsuits and settlements. I mean, it's the lack of knowing how to govern is so acute. It's such a massive problem. I'm legitimately worried for the government of Ottawa County with them in charge. And this is someone who is inclined to agree with their beliefs in terms of theories on government and limited government and all that kind of stuff. But that shows you how serious it is, the fact that someone like me would step up and say this. And I'm more positioned than anybody because I work with them on a daily basis. They hired me as administrator. I've seen all kinds of stuff happen on a daily basis with the way that they govern that. It's a real ongoing risk to the county. So I'd say they've got to go. The current commissioners have got to get out of there. So right. I'm almost ready to say vote for a broken vacuum cleaner over any of them. But people should do their homework. I haven't looked at any other alternatives. I haven't looked in depth. But I think even someone with just basic conservative beliefs and who's not crazy and actually has some experience knowing how to govern and lead would probably be something better. Although I haven't looked at the alternatives, but I would say that who is in there now definitely does have to go. So
right.
that much I'm sure about.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking. I was actually thinking about this before I even came across this quote. I was completely unaware of this quote from Ronald Reagan, but and I included it in a column that I wrote last week. But he said that someone who agrees with me 80% of the time is not my 20% enemy, but is my friend and my ally. I might be butchering that. That's pretty close. And I think that is that's a sentiment that has. I don't know how. I think it's probably part of the mind virus that we've been given on the right is this whole idea of purity test. You've got to agree with me on everything or else. And we've seen that how that mind virus has the impact that it's had on the left, driving it farther and farther left. And I think we as Republicans we really need to reject that whole idea and say there are some issues that are primary above all the others that we really need to focus on, and we don't need to agree on everything. We just need to agree on the most important things, and we need to find a way to work together.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
um, and all right, well, so I think we have. Is there anything else that you want to that we've left out, or that you'd like to cover, that you'd like to add?
I think we've covered a lot of good ground here. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess I'll just underscore the ruling by vindictiveness and impulse, which is how they rule, and ignorance. They don't necessarily know. They don't really know how to govern, but more importantly than that, they don't care that they don't know. Someone has compared this to the situation with President Trump, who also came in as a disruptor, who also came in new, but he actually knows how to run things. And I know because I was there. People can disagree with the policies. That's fine. People go back and forth on that, but it was nothing like what we're seeing here. This is like the dystopian version of change. You get people who talked good. They had a good platform. They came in. I supported the Ottawa Impact Commissioners. I really did. I like what they stood for. But when I got in there and saw, it was just a horrific scene. And I don't have absolute 100% loyalty to anyone but God. And so I'm not going to go along with garbage no matter what side it's on. And I had to step up and call that out. So this is a great learning experience. And again, Scott, I just want to underscore how glad I am that you're doing the reporting that you're doing. When I first discovered you, I was like, I didn't know anyone was doing this. I mean, I didn't know anyone was actually looking at this from a rational point of view and saying, I may be on the same side, quote unquote, so to speak, but that doesn't mean we just let everything go. We got to look at the facts. We got to look at dysfunction, and we've got to actually point this stuff out. I just want to commend you on that again. I
Thank you.
love the work that you're doing. I love the reporting you're doing. And this has got to be a learning experience for people that when someone wants to come in brand new and change things, I think that is appropriate at times. There are times when you got to come in and make changes. But the people that are coming in have got to also know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is they don't know governance. They don't know what they're doing. So now we're going to have to fix the fix, so to speak. And so I just hope everybody out there is able to really think critically and learn from this about, when we want change, how do we actually get change in a way that is effective, but not in a way that brings total incompetence and destruction.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really, really well put. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for the leadership that you're striving for. Left of Center has a really good comment. I don't agree with Mr. Gibbs on a lot policy wise, but this interview has shown that he's very competent. I hope he prevails over the defamation put out against him. And I think any rational person should agree on that sentiment. That it's pretty clear that you've been wronged, and I really wish you the best, and I'll be praying for you. So,
Thank you for that feedback. I really appreciate that. Left of Center, and thank Scott as well. I really appreciate your support and things, and I think that the truth will come out. And I think dealing with people, thankfully, they're not the smartest cookies in the jar, so they make a lot of mistakes, which I think we're going to cause themselves to be revealed. But yes, but I really appreciate that. That's
mhm.
for
Yeah. We have, just one more voice of support there. Sherry says, as a former GOP supporter, I recognize the dysfunction. It's time to take out the extremism. So, and I think, this is how we can all come together. And we have to form a coalition if we want to, that in a world where the Democrat Party is being driven farther and farther to left, and there's this force now that's trying to do the same thing to Republican Party, drive it farther and farther to the right. We need to remove this from the Republican Party and really insist on being, representing the majority and even the middle. Center right is really traditionally where the truth lies in politics. Just center right, and at least to most Republicans. And I think that would be welcome even to many Democrats, versus the far extremes on either side. So
yeah. It's interesting. I have an illustration of what you just described. I was at a conference once. It was maybe a year or two ago, and I'll never forget this interchange. It was really quite hilarious and very accurate. Someone stood up in the crowd and in reference to if you remember the Kraken from the 2020 election, this
right.
total crackpot, insane idea. And
Sidney
he
Powell.
goes, yeah, right. And he was asking the speaker who was speaking about election integrity, what are you going to do about the Kraken? We found that in Venezuela, all this stuff, and then the secret forces and lots of kind of outlandish stuff that a lot of people were being fed at the time. And the speaker said to the person, "Let me ask you a question. Who is your member of the state legislature?" And the person could not answer the question at all. And I think this is a great illustration that a lot of people get wrapped up in this crazy stuff out there, and it's vindictiveness and whatnot. But when it comes time to actually knowing how to implement positive change, like who's your member of the state legislature? What laws need to be changed? What is some good litigation that can be done to actually move the needle? A lot of what you're reporting on, Scott, with these disruptors is that they're getting people away from that. They're getting people away from the actual real solutions. Like, what do we do at a policy level? What do we do at litigation? What do we do on changing regulations to actually move the needle? They get people away from that, and they get people to, come after me, or they get people to say, "Oh, here's this verse. You're with the devil. You're not with us." And it's a really sad phenomenon, just to underscore what you're saying.
Right. Absolutely. Well, this has been just awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us and to be so transparent and open. And we are, we're going to see where this all goes, but we're going to keep exposing the falsehoods. And I think that we really, just pursuing what is true and going where the evidence leads us. So I wish you all the best, John, and just so grateful that we did this. I think it was awesome. Thank you to everyone for your questions. This was a really fun time. So great. Well, take care. We'll see you next time. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.